Hey, Peter.
Mickey.
Yeah, the music didn't play for the intro. It probably confused you a little bit.
Well, yes. Can we hear? We're all here. We've manifested.
Yeah, we've manifested into the ether that is quarantine. Hi, Peter. How you doing? I know it's been a pretty hectic week for you, and
Mickey,
for everybody.
It has been. It has, and we're very excited because we're not even going to bring up impeachment today.
No,
we're not going to bring up Washington today. We are going local.
Yes,
we are going to focus on probably how you actually rebuild and recreate and bring cities back, and we're going to take a look at holistically how do you bring together capitalism, communities that have a lot to offer but have been kind of impoverished, seem to be the subject of problems in cities, but they may hold our future. So that's what we're getting excited about that today. And
I think this is good. You know, this is about sort of how do we build back better? How do we revitalize and reinvigorate and sort of regenerate communities? And you've been out doing some investigative reporting about it. And we also have a guest tonight that's a friend of mine, and I'm just a big fan of Eve Picker. How do we want to start? You want to have our guest come on first?
I think we ought to bring Eve on and do a little bit of the backstory of perhaps how we got here. You know, how we had cities, how we had urban renewal, how we have new ideas, and perhaps where we go from here. So why don't we bring on Eve and Omid, if you can, and then let's also bring on our friend Omid. Eve, pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, Eve, good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me here.
Omid, please come on if you feel like it. If not, we'll bring you on.
Hi guys.
All right, now we've gone behind the scenes. Omid usually runs the show from his control room in a virtual location somewhere, but he and I were both in San Diego last week, shooting footage that's really part of a new fund that we're all working on. That's doing really interesting regeneration in cities. So we're going to share some of that today from our field.
And that'll be a field trip to both San Diego and also some things happening in Atlanta. And what I thought would be fun, and you've got a little bit of something from San Francisco, and then Peter, I think too, after we talk to Eve. But let's kick Omid back out because he's probably still.
I'm still editing. That's right.
We ready to go with the Market Street prototyping?
I'll have that in probably 30 seconds. I'll have that.
There we go. This is real-time production. Okie doke.
Yeah. Okay. Have a great show, guys.
Thanks, Omid. Hey, Eve. Thank you so much for joining. So I'll do a little setup, but I think Peter and I will just interview just to chat. So a number of years ago, I was working with one of my partners in crime, Dutch. And he introduced me to you, and I learned all about how you kind of brought back most of downtown Pittsburgh. I mean, industrial.
Oh, that's a really overstatement.
Come on, you know that was true. And I would go and see these beautiful places. Even one of my other friends bought a place downtown, and it was like, who designed this? Oh, this is from Eve and Dutch and whatever. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. It was like beautiful. But then I remembered all sorts of things like, CityLAB, where you were running almost like an inverse TED, where it was inviting everybody instead of trying to be really, sort of only a few people could come, and you were getting really great conversations going on, in the church and Liberty or whatever, and we hang out for the night. So I feel like I had such a great time learning about what you were doing. And then I remembered at one point you did a TED talk in Pittsburgh that was called the Department of Bottom Up.
Yes.
And I just have to tell you, that was like, I told Peter about it, and I was like, she gets it. She's like actually probably the one pioneering it. Yeah. So who is Eve? Tell us a little bit of your backstory.
Okay, so probably Eve was made into who I am today by Pittsburgh, actually. And so I'm an architect by training, and I came to the United States. I can't see you anymore. Where are you? I came to the United States to do a master's at Columbia in urban design, and I'd always really loved cities. More than architecture on its own, I was always really interested in how real estate and buildings make places for people. And I unexpectedly moved to Pittsburgh, which I would say is really transformational and is pretty much the subject of your show tonight, because Pittsburgh was in pretty bad shape. It had even now it only has, I think, 300,000 occupants compared to maybe 700,000 at its peak. So lots of vacancy. And it was a sad place when I came. People were really depressed about it. It was like, it's a beautiful city. You know it downtown, right, Mickey? It's the architecture is extraordinary. And people, I would say this is a beautiful place, and people would say, you don't really mean that, do you?
Isn't the river on fire?
No, it's like, this is really, we're in bad shape. But I just learned so much here because I helped start a nonprofit community development corporation. I learned how to be a developer in places where banks don't really want to go yet. And I kind of learned about community development and how much people love the places they live in. So that was it was a very transformational number of years for me in Pittsburgh, and led me to start redeveloping buildings myself. I went to the dark side and became a developer. But there were always buildings. I really firmly believe that buildings and real estate should make places better. So I'm not really interested in being a developer for the sake of doing the deal. I'm interested in being a developer for the sake of remaking a place, right? So, and it's been a lot of fun and a very interesting journey. But I have to tell you, the biggest lesson I learned was that as much as I love design, and I'm a design snob and I love good architecture, in the end, that's not what it's about. It's really all about finance, and it's all about who has the money. And what happened over a 10-year period between 2000 and 2010, I think, is what's made it even more difficult to transform main streets and places in the United States. Because,
and I remember you told me a little bit about this the last time we talked. It was a while ago, but you were saying that just even the way that the city and banks were willing to invest or not invest started changing pretty.
It did, and it actually started with the Bush administration, because federal dollars flowed down to local municipalities who would then disperse the funds as deferred mortgages, or to work in places that really needed it, and those funds really dried up. And then the banking meltdown came as well, and banks started demanding more equity in projects, and all of that sort of squeezed out small developers trying to do first off projects, the sort of projects that you need in places to kickstart something. Like, banks want to appraise everything, and they want to see 3 projects in place before they lend. And how is that going to work in a place that hasn't had any investment?
So I am so excited to share.
One of the challenges was this notion that, developers kept developing. Real estate didn't disappear, but you ended up pushing out all the experimental developers, all the really creative ones. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Peter wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm so excited to share what we're going to do today, because we're going to look at stuff from the perspective of developers, investors. How do you actually then bring a community along so the community not only incubates small businesses, but then owns not only their business, but their real estate.
That is exciting.
And scale. Yeah. So
that is exciting.
And so tell us a little bit about now, your solution to it, or your attempt at saying, actually, we need to have creative people having a chance to do this, and this notion of owning. Because I remember when you were starting in one of the neighborhoods right there in your Friendship or whatever, and you were saying, how do we change, even build tiny houses here? How do we start actually helping the community understand? I remember that really vividly.
So my journey, I've moved to even darker side. I now deal with securities law and financial technology. And so, as I was squeezed out of doing development, because it was not the sort of development that your typical wealthy person would want to invest in. These were really experimental, difficult sort of projects that you'd have to wait a long time to see a return on. And I was squeezed out of that because of those changes. And then someone told me about the Jobs Act in the early, about 2013. And the Jobs Act, do you know about the Jobs Act at all? of 2012?
I suspect Peter does, but this is during the Obama administration, right? And
during the Obama. So the Jobs Act of 2012 really sought to move crowdfunding for donations to crowdfunding for investment. And that was a really big shift that was brought on by some really big raises on Kickstarter that got people really angry, like Oculus Rift, where they made a donation and then Oculus Rift was sold for billions of dollars and they got a T-shirt, right? So people wanted to really invest in those startups and in startups that were their kids' startups or their neighborhood coffee shop. And
didn't the Jobs Act also help lower the barrier for people to be an investor? I mean,
that's exactly right. So they took two existing securities laws and made a number of changes. Probably the biggest was this, that you no longer had to look for investors behind closed doors privately. You could advertise broadly to the general public these investment opportunities. And then they introduced a tiny little third regulation called regulation crowdfunding, which took over 4 years for the SEC to write, which lets anyone over the age of 18 invest. And I thought, when I heard about this, I thought, wow, that is a really powerful tool, because when you work in a neighborhood on a real estate project and your neighbors all want to see it happen, here's a way for them to invest, even if it's only a little bit. They can point at it and say, I helped build that building. This is my place.
Are you applying this, Eve, now to real estate or to the small businesses or to both?
To real estate.
How does it practically play out?
So it plays out. It's played out in a number of different ways. There are a number of platforms out there, all doing different things, and there are quite a few doing business offerings. But I focus on real estate. That's exactly what I focus on, and I've added one extra layer to it, and that is impact. And so we built this proprietary change index, and we really only raise money for projects that will make some sort of transformational change. Not a Dunkin' Donuts in the suburbs, not a Microtel, but something that's going to create jobs or push further with energy conservation, or make an investment in a neighborhood that's never had one before, or help build generational wealth. Those are the sorts of transformations we're interested in.
And when you raise money, is part of the idea that the crowdfunding helps the capital stack so that things that weren't possible become possible when you add in loans and other equity and developers and such?
There's a couple of reasons why people might want to use crowdfunding like this. Sometimes it's a small project and they can raise the equity they need. They just can't, they don't have enough on their own, and they need 30% to satisfy the bank. And it is a way to legally gather their friends and family. You really can't sell securities without this law, right?
And you built this platform so that it was actually SEC compliant.
It's absolutely. We're registered.
You don't have to get, if I'm trying to build a property in my neighborhood, I don't have to get smart about all that stuff.
No.
The whole idea is the platform helps me do this, but you have this index, and I remember you showing me a big spreadsheet of all the different things, but it was like walkability, and it was, is it woman-owned business? Is it this? Is it this? It's really fascinating. That it had a impact.
So the SEC side of it, yes, it's very complicated, and we are registered with the SEC, and we are members of FINRA, and we're surveilled, and we kind of almost act like a mini broker-dealer. And so when you come to our platform, it looks really simple. It takes 60 seconds to invest. Anyone over the age of 18 can invest, no questions asked. And on the developer side, we've also helped streamline the process for creating what the SEC wants them to register, so it's not overwhelming for them. So it looks simple, but in the background, there's a ton of stuff that we have to do.
Geographically, give us a sense, what have been some of the most exciting projects, and geographically,
maybe we can pull up the site.
They're all exciting.
Yeah,
we can pull up the site. Just to be really clear about this. This little rule, regulation crowdfunding, is a non-solicitation rule, and the SEC wants to really make sure that everyone gets the same information in the same place at the same time. There's no backdoor conversations. So I can't talk about the terms of the offering. I can tell you about the projects. You can see them on the website, but I can't say what the offering is.
I'd love to hear the kinds of lighthouse projects, like the kind of projects.
So if you want to pull up the, I mean, I think they're all exciting.
Pull up. Hey, Omid, can you pull up the
smallchange.co?
and maybe put the ticker down there so people and send it out to everybody so people can do it.
So we're actually organizing the website by minority developers, female developers, creative economy developers, affordable housing. So if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see that these tiles show you which offerings are open and which offerings are closed. And we have 5 open at the moment, and they're all really wildly different. So as an example, 2 minority developers on the site, Savers Village and Walbrook Junction, are both really endeavoring to build generational wealth, I would say. And Savers Village programmatically, they just got a write-up in Forbes, which was lovely. But it is really, it's workforce housing, 40 units on a site that's been vacant for a long time that they're purchasing from the city. But what's really unique about it is not the workforce housing bit. They are programmatically setting aside 10% of every tenant's rent into a savings account and teaching them how to be financially literate so that in 3 to 5 years, they have the hand money for a home.
Oh, wow.
And that's really the intention. I mean, yes, it's going to put affordable housing on the site as well, but it's a very interesting play on building wealth. And Daryl, who is the developer, grew up in this neighborhood and is really trying to give something back. So it's a pretty wonderful story.
If you scroll through this gives you a sense over on the right.
If you scroll down,
200,000.
Scroll down a bit, you can see where you can invest. And we organize the page. Page is always in the same way. You can click above, add some change, and download the formal disclosure packet. No, well, that's actually, just go back. Go back. But you see so that's the disclosure packet that is the text packet that is actually registered with the SEC. And kind of we tell the story on the site and there's plenty of information there for everyone. And we try to break it down in a way that everyone can understand, because that's another wonderful thing about this rule. We are required to present the information in plain English. And I really love that about this rule. So,
this is nice too. The small change index, that goes to that thing we were talking about. That
yes.
You really try to let people look, hey, are you going to invest in something that's really going to have impact?
Yes, we do score it in the background, but the FINRA won't let us show the scores because we're not supposed to be curating projects. There's so many rules. This is a very rule-bound world.
Since you're not allowed to solicit, and yet people want to raise money, what's the marketing mechanism? What draws people to the site, and how do you create excitement around the projects?
So, I mean, that's really up to each developer, and we are also building a crowd of our own. So we have quite a few account holders growing every day. We market a ton of content constantly, and we always market each offering in the same way with e-blasts, but it's a little bit difficult compared to Kickstarter, where you can really build the campaign ahead of time. You're not supposed to tell anyone about these offerings before you go live. You can tell family and friends and business partners, but you can talk about the project as much as you want. You can say, I'm doing this, I'm going to make savings accounts for people. The project is going to cost $15 million. You just can't say, and I'm raising $500,000 and you could get this return.
And Eve, did you organize Small Change as a nonprofit or a for-profit company?
No, it's a for-profit. Maybe eventually it's a for-profit.
Does something like this require a lot of capital by the time?
Oh, yes.
Because you've got regulation stuff going on,
yes.
your website, all this stuff, right?
Yes, way more than I thought. Yeah. No, it's a technology platform. So, the fact that you can invest electronically and that we are doing everything that's required. There are notifications that are made. There is information that has to be stored. We're in the middle of a FINRA audit. We have to be able to provide all the information on every offering, on every investor to show that we're following the rules. So it is really a very burdensome rule, but But people who come and invest and use our site, we're not burdening them with that. We've built a funding portal that follows the rules so that you can raise money this way.
So actually, Omid, can you pull back up the site for a second? And I just noticed the ticker at the bottom, it should probably say smallchange.co.
There's no S, it's just
S
small change.
But
not small changes.
Probably making small changes,
yeah,
but people won't be able to find it that way.
They went for, there you go, that's correct now.
And then Omid, can you pull back up the site? I wanted to just say, there are some examples on there of successfully funded ones.
Yes, so you can see we have 5 open right now at the top, and then starting with Sharswood and further down the page, these are successfully funded projects, and some of them have exited, like the ones that are pink have exited and paid equity back with return. So you have a variety of things at different stages here.
Because they're real estate projects that generally take a while to exit, how quickly do things exit? Because often a real estate project's many, many years before.
Well, they're all different. Some of them are 1 year, some of them are 10 years. It really depends on the project. We don't dictate the terms that a developer, I mean, these projects are so hard to do that we work with the developer on what works with them. And in the end, the investor has to decide, is this a good deal for me or not? Some people want a quick return. Some people want to just invest in something meaningful. It's really a range of people out there. So Brooklyn Heights Farm was pretty quick, for example. Marlborough Pike was pretty quick.
And these are across the country, right?
They're all across the country. So they're everywhere from New York to Pennsylvania, DC, New Orleans, LA, Long Beach, everywhere.
Do you see the developers themselves, because what part of the things we talked about was trying to get more experimental creative developers who actually care about the impact. Are you seeing them succeeding and then coming back to the platform?
Yeah, we definitely have return developers. You can already see a couple on there, and there's some who are talking to us about a series of deals they want to do in that way. That because their intent is really to include the neighborhood, and they want to.
Even a project like this, how much of the project are you finding empirically comes from crowdfunding in the neighborhood, versus that gets neighborhood engagement, but you still either have going to a fund or you're going to bank for financing? How does the capital stack work?
Really varies. It really varies. So Walbrook Junction, which is live at the moment, is really half-half. They're bringing half the equity and they're raising the other half, and will probably succeed. Freeman Berkshires are raising all the equity on the site. Others have come to us with a much bigger projects with a much bigger need for equity, and say that we really just want to raise this little piece so we can let the neighborhood invest. So it's really a great variety of needs. I mean, our hope is to grow and to be able to raise more and more and more money this way. We are very early on.
What's the profile of the investor? Who do you find is showing up?
So I don't know all my investors because this is an electronic platform. Yeah. It's hard to track them all, but I certainly know that some of them are showing up because they want to invest in a meaningful way. Others show up because they want to invest in real estate and they've never had the opportunity before.
It's like a way to tip your toes in the water a little bit.
So I think there's really a variety of investor profiles, which is also really interesting to me. I wish more people with deeper pockets would show up, but they're eventually I'm sure they will, but they tend to be a slightly more conservative group. But I mean, I have investors who you're limited as to how much you can invest every year based on your net income and net worth, and they're calculating every dollar they can put in and when they can invest the next amount. So they're building their little portfolios. I mean, I think this is amazing.
It sort of helps a lot more people do what you were able to, find through.
They only had a bank. That's all they had.
One of the reasons I asked the question is we did a show a couple of weeks ago on kind of the crazy stuff around Robinhood and GameStop and memes, which of course it's called investing, but in a way, it is to investing as kind of like, mentholated cigarettes for kids are to a community, right? It kind of creates a perverse set of incentives. And this truly is community investing, longer term returns. So just kind of, very, very organic kind of stuff. And when the Jobs Act got created, there were some things that looked scammy. And then some things like yours really started establishing themselves as a deeper.
Well, I think the SEC was scared about scammy, but there's been very little scam, if any at all. So I think the industry has proven itself as a pretty admirable first step into democratizing investment and giving people who have been called unsophisticated investors because they don't have as much money a chance to invest. And I'm not sure that they're all unsophisticated.
Yeah, so. Not even fair. I think that's just like code for keep the riffraff out kind of thing.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the dynamics that favor projects like this, because sometimes, like in a blighted neighborhood, is a very long time between when you buy a piece of property and you're ready to develop it, and that creates this kind of poverty cycle kind of
right.
So you need and you must have found with Pittsburgh, particularly in your earlier practice, that here was a city with the best bones in the world, but people weren't believing in it. So there was a series of steps you had to go through to start bringing community back, and then you're trading off. Is it does it get gentrified? How do we include people? Right.
I wish we could all look in a glass ball and see gentrification coming. That's very tough. But definitely investing in real estate like this is a long-term gain, and people are very impatient. And I wish, like, through all the education that's going on, I wish that people understood that real estate is a long game. It's not a short game, right? And that's probably the most difficult piece for people to understand. They say, I don't want to make a long-term investment. Can I get my money back in 6 months? I'm like, no, you've got to wait, to build the building and fill it and stabilize it before it has any value, right?
So Eve, one of the things I remembered was that there were neighborhoods across Pittsburgh that had a little bit of your footprint on them in terms of, here's a place that's actually like an incubator for other startups, and they had a way to actually start. And in fact, one of the groups that I worked with, Russ Sabo and the team that kind of
they're my tenants, yeah. They're actually my tenants of the Liberty Bank building, yeah.
Yeah, the Liberty Bank building. But then you also had like Conflict Kitchen, and you had could you tell us a little bit about things you're really proud of in that kind of journey? Just pick.
I was really proud of the work I did in East Liberty, which was a really there was no investment in that neighborhood at all, and I invested in a couple of buildings there with the full intention of making them a proud part of the neighborhood. Actually, what shocked me most in East Liberty is the gentrification that's happened there in the last couple of years.
It came in very quickly, yeah.
Very quickly. And I hate to think I was a part of that, because that really wasn't the intention. So it came in like, that neighborhood was a great neighborhood, a really, truly diverse neighborhood for about a year, and then it was over.
Oh, really? That fast?
It went really fast.
I guess some of that was suddenly some West Coast tech companies seeing that there might be an opportunity to come to Pittsburgh and tap into Carnegie Mellon and the brain.
I think also for developers like myself who come in really early on and take a risk, and we sort of start to stabilize the market. Yeah. And then the big guys come, and we're sort of lying face down in the mud while they're trampling us from behind, figuring out how to make money off this neighborhood. And that's really hard to stop. And I wish there was some way to balance it. It also happened downtown, I think.
Yeah. And
downtown for me has become a little bit of not as diverse a neighborhood as I hoped it would be. Yeah.
So one of the things I guess I'm curious about is what do you see looking forward? I mean, what's your aspiration for the platform? What's your aspiration for just almost a new generation that can do
so,
this.
Yeah. So through the misery of the pandemic, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is maybe more profound than most of us realize. And the conversations I'm having are just seriously exciting around that, because I'm talking to more and more minority developers who are coming to the site, who really are being bolder about having their own stake in this. And I just feel enormously privileged to have built this thing sort of ready and waiting for them.
It's ready. Yeah, it's kind of waiting for them.
So I think, I hope we can play a part in that. I think building wealth for everyone is critical in many ways, not just the investors who get a chance to invest, but the neighborhoods getting a chance to invest in what's being built there. So I think there's a huge opportunity, but I'm waiting patiently to see how it plays out.
Well, I'd love, I actually think you might enjoy, and I'd love your response to some of the reporting Peter and Omid have just come back from doing. We met a group about a year or two ago. Peter probably started working with them. That was really looking at a different approach to things. And I'm not, I feel naive about some of this stuff, but I'd love to see what Peter and Omid have brought back for us to see now that they're checking back in with them, having gone down there to see last week. And then I'd love your reaction to it and kind of what you're worried about, because, you've got a lot of depth in this stuff, but also what you might want to say, oh, I actually like what's going on there. Let's see how we actually make it more of a platform play, not just a one-off. Because I think today it's what they're going to show is something that's kind of like much earlier than you are in terms of bootstrapping, but actually doing some interesting things.
I think this story actually began several years ago, Mickey, when you and I entered the picture, when in San Francisco we were looking at revitalizing Market Street.
So we're going to go back there first, and
we want to go because what we want.
But actually, I want to give, for 1 second, let me give Eve a little context. So Peter helped co-found something called the Gray Area Foundation in Pittsburgh, and it's really about that gray area between the city and its citizens, and between artists and say that again, Peter.
San Francisco.
In San Francisco. Yeah, sorry.
You're slipping back to your roots, Mickey.
I don't know what I'm saying. But I remember I became a fellow at Autodesk, which is right on Market Street. And I walked outside one day, and from the Ferry Building all the way to the unemployment office and the state and the city capitol, there were prototypes on every street corner, and there were both, just a wild amount of people doing things. These are big, and they were prototyping different kinds of things, and I didn't know what they were, but they were actually all being built over at the Autodesk Pier 9, factory workshop that we opened up to people. But I was new to it, and then I, ended up becoming fast friends with Peter, and so Peter's going to set it up with some efforts.
And here's where I want to start with this. I want to start with the story there, because I want to actually point out some stuff we did there that not so much a failure, but something that set up a set of problems that I think maybe today we're a little bit more onto. So, Mick, as you know, if we go back 5 or 6 years, I was working on a book called The Maker City. Yep. And this was Dale Doherty and I did this, and Dale, of course, started the Maker movement, and that was all about people co-creating and building and local manufacturing. And I had been doing a whole bunch of work on civic engagement, and this is kind of where Omid and I met. And we were doing some of the first hackathons in San Francisco. How do people get involved and build apps around city data and solve problems? And we realized these two things came together in this notion, which we call Maker City. And at the time, the developers in San Francisco were trying to figure out, how do we engage the community meaningfully in what's going to get built? Because usually what happens is the developer has an idea, they go to a community meeting, they get yelled at, they try to get it entitled, and they go build the whole thing. And
right.
and here, because look, San Francisco has a participatory culture and has a Burning Man culture where people go build stuff, and we have software developers, people think they can build stuff all the time. We're like, well, maybe we could do this with the city. And so the first developer that we worked with, which was 5M, which is the Hearst Forest Cities development right around Mission Street, their idea was, if we could get if we could like literally have people use all of the space and build temporary structures, we could find out what worked and what didn't work, get people engaged, and it might help the entitlement. And the city of San Francisco, the planners were like, it cannot work out well if we let the public design public space, because they didn't go to architecture school and they don't know the rules. And this struck us. This sounded just like journalists saying we can't have bloggers and brands saying we don't even talk about the brand. So we got all excited. We thought this was part of social media. So then once it worked, the city was like, what if we got everybody involved in imagining what Market Street would look like? And so Omid and I went out, and we were running this through Gray Area, and we were working with the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and the Knight Foundation funded it. We did this a couple of years in a row. And Omid, why don't we show the video? And I think we set this to music. We actually set this to one of the people who helped create the prototype wrote a song about prototyping. Right. So this will give you a sense for what people are doing. And remember, Market Street in San Francisco is spectacularly not activated. It's a big, wide boulevard. It's got the buses, a few stores, and how do you get it activated? And particularly some of the tougher parts of town, people doing interesting things. So let's take a look at our first clip.
Yeah.
There's a little something no one's talking about. It's a learning tool to work things out. 1 to 1 or 1 to 3. Get hands on, come along, dee-wee. It's really often cheap out of sight. It's the prototype. Let's do the prototype. There's no wrong or right. It's a learning tool. Unite, let's do the prototype. Is this idea deserve more time in my life?
This is called Rock Around the Block. It's one of the urban prototypes here. It forces you to look at your partner or a member of the armed forces or whoever you happen to be with.
It's interesting because you are close enough that it's kind of intimate, and that at the same time you kind of communicate without saying anything, just by like looking at each other, and then like, you know, you're rocking and I'm rocking, and we end up rocking together.
So each of these maps is the same location but tells a different story.
Exactly. I think people feel very comfortable just walking up to it and playing with it, and they find a spot that they are familiar with, and then they are curious to kind of just move it around.
So this is a storytelling booth. You're asked to record up to a 90-second story about a stranger that you once met. And then in return, you get to also hear someone else's story about a stranger that they have met. So it's a way to kind of connect our community through storytelling.
Okay, hey, I was in Montreal.
The goal with Street Speak is to actually place it in the communities that we're talking about developing and allow them to kind of come forward with their stories when they feel comfortable sharing them.
It's people's living room. It's where people come out and socialize, and as San Francisco's civic spine, if we can't erase barriers that are dividing us right now in a space like Market Street, we're going to have a lot of trouble solving a lot of other issues in the city. And so we have to start with the public spaces and creating spaces of connection and of empathy. And from there, I think we have the energy and the positive thoughts of how to address the deeper divisions that are challenging the city today.
So this project was very successful in that we measured a number of things, including dwell time. People spent more time. Oh, he had some funny line at the end, like,
it's like building community.
It's like building community. It always comes back there. Yeah. So this increased dwell time. Gale architects measured the stuff. They did a wonderful job. People of different ages and races connected, and it showed that you could speed up this process of connection in a community. So that was good. On the other hand, mechanisms like this kind of tend to gentrify, and the fact that if you make something better and you improve it, it doesn't help transfer wealth to kind of impoverished people who were there first. And San Francisco famously incubated things, but what we were mostly incubating were startups. We were not incubating small businesses, community businesses, or finding kind of the arts and what was going on in the mission or neighborhood and building that up sustainably. So, and most importantly, this project was kind of not directly related to the real estate side of things. Like, it was an amenity that a real estate person would pay for, but it wasn't the project itself. So fast forward to the present day, and our friends at CoPlace in San Diego. And what they have done is they go literally into one of the worst blocks, the block in San Diego that had the greatest crime, the greatest drugs. It was a block that was so difficult for the city.
Why don't we let the CoPlace guys tell us about this, Peter?
Okay, so why don't we go to our first clip, and we're going to visit a place called Courtyard,
which
was one of the first projects, and we're going to see what happened there. And the voices you're going to hear is from a real estate developer who is completely amazed because it is a process that both increases real estate value and brings people along. So let's take a look at this that we were shooting last week with some footage that shows how it came together.
Socially distanced and with double masks.
First Courtyard was a city block adjacent to downtown San Diego. It was, I believe it had the highest number of 911 calls in the city. Real estate in that area was selling for $100 a foot, roughly. This was just a no man's land of tents. It was a tent city, a lot of drug deals. It was a rough spot. We took it over. We implemented our model that had a food, music venue, beer garden, some retail, small office, platform made out of shipping containers that instantly got acknowledged as being cool. Within 3-4 years, the city was able to sell that property for about 4 times more than they sold the block next to it. So they were exceedingly happy. Now the adjacent blocks are, we're talking, 50,000 square foot lots that are selling for, $500-600 a foot. That current location has been developed, and it is a 34 or 40 story tower with a UCSD extension campus at the bottom floors. So it's come a long way, and the city contacted us, and they had another troubled child 2 blocks down, and they asked us to take it over, and we are operating there currently. It took us 8 hours to uproot the business model, move all the containers, and put them down in the next location.
Now, what's important here is these mechanisms increase value, and in particular, like that 40-story building went up. Otherwise, it would have been years before you could afford to do that. You would have had a mid-rise building, and because it attracted, there was this generative thing. All the people were coming into this part of town that sucked, but there was only a mile from downtown. So wealth came in from one part of town, participated here, and got businesses to grow here. And when the new building went up, then the temporary structure just moved a block down, and it's repeating itself. So that's the first phase. That worked really well. Now the next question is, well, can you then build a part of town where people permanently own their businesses, perhaps even own as condos the space of their businesses, so that wealth continues with them? And how might that work? So here we're going to switch the focus, and we're going to talk to one of the entrepreneurs, Milo, who started with a couple of businesses, and now he's literally helping to incubate a number of the other businesses. And then who else is in this clip, Omin?
Yeah, so this video kind of sets up the Barrio. So Barrio Logan is a historically Hispanic Latinx community in San Diego. And I you know what? I think I'll let the characters in the film tell us more about it.
Go ahead.
There's one word to describe Barrio Logan, it would be cultura. I'm Chef Claudia Sandoval, and welcome to Barrio Logan. Today, I'm gonna give you a sneak peek into some of my favorite places in the area. Some of the must-do activities include the Barrio Logan art crawl, filled with incredible art. Wednesdays at La Vuelta car cruise are an absolute phenomenon. Lowriders and oldies cars, some of the best freestyle beats.
Por Vida Coffee Shop, which was a coffee shop founded by 2 Latinos in the neighborhood. And Latinos that someone believed in them and gave them access to capital to be able to open up a neighborhood Chicano themed coffee shop. They've grown even during COVID. So economic prosperity and opportunity can be made possible. My goal in the neighborhood is that some of the businesses here that are renting, that we get them access to capital. We get them the right financing to be able to purchase the buildings when they become available, so that they can become not just renter pillars in the community, but become owners in their own neighborhood, so that they're part of the redevelopment of the community and get some sense of community ownership. The challenge there is the access to capital. And if you don't have access to capital to become an owner, you run the risk of being displaced. See, I love this. You know, where else would we see that, right? Except in the barrio. So, and I'm smiling, I know you can't see with the mask on, but...
I own 2 coffee shops. I got a Mexican restaurant next door that it's owned by our family too. And business is good. What I was doing is I was grabbing my pop-up tenants that were popping up at this flea market, and I was offering them space in the building, and then they were going, so neither they were spending $50 to rent a space in this parking lot, and then the next step was then they were renting a $300 little room to have their space on a more permanent level, you know, and I was doing this and I was shuffling these people around but at the time, like I said, I just thought like, I'm just trying to fill space. It was more of an incubation system that was created that I had no idea. But once he told me, I was like, oh wow, like this is really a thing, you know, and it's really working, and it has legs. Yeah, people want to say that, even Barrio Logan, oh, it's been gentrified and it's been this and that. Yeah, but not really, you know what I mean? Because you could look at this and we could be fast forward 7-Elevens and Starbucks and all this, like 75, 80, 90% of the businesses here are brown owned.
And the cool thing here is that because the community is so enthusiastic and they know they're going to build businesses and own it, they're not objecting. So it's easier to go raise the money and get things started. And because there's this temporary mechanism that raises the real estate value, it's much less time to go build the larger project. So after this worked a couple of times in San Francisco, the city said, could we just repeat this in other troubled neighborhoods? And they passed a placemaking ordinance. And I'm thinking, if you're explaining to investors that aren't familiar with placemaking, they're just regular investors, then you have to explain all of placemaking, which we might know. And I realized, actually, placemaking is code for the neighborhood insists you reduce the regulatory overhead, let them develop stuff faster because they're all going to get jobs, and it's going to be based on their own culture, right? So that picked up space. So the next project, which we're not going to show you the clip of, but there's another portion near there, they've now bought up kind of the whole block, like 2 or 3 blocks. And the idea then is they also want to condoize the businesses so that they can control the whole property, so that as people buy in, they're not only renting temporary structures, but they actually own their space, so that if they do well and they exit, they can sell it, but there's generational wealth there. And that project is quite repeatable. And so the next one that, as this expands, that we're working on is in Atlanta on the west side. So the west side of Atlanta is, again, it's one of the poorer parts of town. And just before CoPlace showed up, they passed an ordinance, no more development, because it was just they felt exploited and gentrification coming in, right? Because people were building apartment buildings, but not in dialogue with the community, kind of classic urban rural stuff. As soon as Milo showed up, the guy who we just met, together with the development team, meeting then with the local African-American leaders and people who saw that there, the city said, okay, for you can develop here because we actually like what's going on. And so,
but now this new city that you're talking about now is, instead of San Diego, you're talking about Atlanta?
Atlanta, right. So there's 3 or 4 projects that are going in San Diego. It's successful in San Diego. The city loves it. It's a thing, right? Now, what the CoPlace would like to do is work with local developers. So the formula is you go into another city, you work with a developer who both can raise money and can get access and can develop. But he also knows that to do a project that he wanted to do in a challenged part of town, the community might fight him. And he also didn't have the mechanism to make that property perform in the short term. By putting something like this in place, you get economic activity going, the community's co-creating, the value goes up so you can build a bigger property, and the community's happy because it's actually an expression of their culture and their businesses. So a lot of what's getting created here are these small businesses. They could be artisanal businesses, food businesses, cultural businesses, as well as things like dog parks and incubators.
Peter, if I remember correctly, one of the things they were telling us last time I saw them, was probably not a year or so ago, but was that they offered local people who had never been an entrepreneur a chance to like start up the thing they dreamed about, but they only had to take like a half of a shipping container to do it in this kind of thing that they were bringing people to. But if they were successful, you know, they would have a little bit more and they could get a whole shipping container. And if that was successful, then when the building got built, then they would actually be there, but they began to actually be part of the owners. So this wasn't push people out of the neighborhood once it started, you know, kind of coming up economically. It was more, you've actually built an entrepreneur class of Main Street entrepreneurs that are from the neighborhood.
It's lowering the bar to become an entrepreneur, that you can do the thing you want to do. So this is we met Milo, who basically said he was renting out small bits of space and trading people up, and he just thought he was selling space, but it turns out he was an incubator. If we were to meet Xochitl and some of the other people, she started at $50 a day doing food, and then she moved to $300 a day, and then she rented a space, and then she had multiple spaces, and now she has a number of businesses because she was to go up. And then there's a series of soft services that go on, right? You're actually driving people to the whole thing. You're co-promoting. You have so there's a series of things you do to kind of build the stuff up. But then the other point is you're using inexpensive temporary stuff to start.
I'd love to put this to Eve. Eve, I was editing these clips that we just saw for the most part of the start of the show, but do you see this fitting into small change as like does the process we just described? Or
Eve, you're on mute. So
I'm on mute. Okay. Yeah, you know, I someone was running up and down the stairs. I love this sort of stuff and pop-ups and everything, but the problem is if you don't give people in the community a real stake in that place, when it gains value, they're gone.
And they don't get the return on that.
They don't get any of the upside, and that's, you know, that's really tough for developers. I mean, developers want that cultural diversity and vivaciousness and to get their building started, but what happens when they can push rents up? You know, what happens to the people who's started the businesses there? They helped build that, but they don't have any ownership in it.
Well, let me just ask you this, because this is precisely, I think, the big question here, which is you can build a business, but if the rent goes up, you're still a slave to somebody. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons that this developer wants to have control over more of the neighborhood, so he can then take his ground floor space, condoize that, and sell that to the merchant. So just as you've created one of those projects, a fund where people can invest and eventually be a homeowner.
Absolutely.
So too, you know, these people would basically be renting to own or paying a mortgage, and they could have even ever smaller spaces, right? So
I think this goes back to Omid's question, really, which is sort of, you know, how does like a platform like Small Change play in the part that maybe these other groups are not doing yet, which is actually helping them.
Yeah, I mean, Small
Change
Change does one particular thing, but I've been hearing lots of other stories about how to build wealth and co-own properties around the country that are slightly different models. So we're only one model. There are actually co-ownership projects going on right now where the community owns the project, and that's one step further. But you know, that's a pretty big undertaking, right? So it really depends on the developer. Like I've certainly worked with developers who always go to the community first for tenants. They always try to find someone in the community who's been trying to build a business, and that's wonderful. Those developers have also come to me and said, okay, well, I want to take it one step further, and I want to give the community an opportunity to invest in what I'm building because I think it's going to have more value. So that's another possibility, you know. And right at the other end of the scale is people who are really building cooperatives, like where the whole community owns the building. Like we don't do that, but I certainly know of examples of that all over the country, and I admire what they're doing. So I think there's a lot of things percolating right now in this whole area. You might have noticed the one gentleman who was talking about, I think the coffee shop said, the biggest problem we have is capital.
Access to capital, yeah.
access to capital.
Right.
And why
that
is
seems
that?
to be the problem
That
you're
is
solving.
because redlining is alive and kicking in this country. So, you know, we hear one story after the other from Black people or Latinos or others who say their white neighbors got a loan and they didn't. And so access to capital, I mean, there are so many systemic failures that we have to fix. You know, small change is just like a little tiny scratch at the surface, right? We have a lot to fix.
And this also points out why this is such a holistic problem, right? Which is you need to fire up the entrepreneurs and the local businesses. You then have to find a mechanism for them to have some form of ownership of both the real estate and the business. That requires a fund where the people putting the money in the fund think it's de-risked because you're putting the whole thing together, so they don't just want to go get a Starbucks to be a tenant, and then they're willing to make the loan to whoever this person is, right? And that's one of the nice things about starting with things that are 1 or 2 or 3 blocks big, right? Because you can kind of have a holistic.
Yes, but let me tell you how deep the problem is. I have a friend who was a MacArthur Fellow. She's a Black woman, and she said the words to me that I will never get a bank loan in my life. Black women don't get loans from banks. Now, she might be proving that wrong, but it's very difficult. I do a podcast series weekly, and I interviewed a professional Black man who was running an important agency in New York City, 6-figure salary, an amazing guy who's doing development on the side with his parents in his small town that he grew up in. They cannot get a loan. They see white people all around them getting loans.
Yeah.
Now, is this something, philanthropic money can come in and help alleviate?
Well, I know there's a lot of foundations very interested in this problem, but I mean, we're talking about opinions and people's points of views that run really deep, and I mean,
this is one of the things that we discovered in looking at this is one of the reasons the group that we're talking to wants to raise a significant fund is so that as they go in and do these projects, the funds are exactly available for the small business people to then be able to own their property. Because if you don't put that fund together and you just let it be at the mercy of whatever funding's out there, this stuff won't happen. It requires.
So I'm interested in knowing who gets to invest in the fund.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a fund mechanism that came out of the Jobs Act that is absolutely ideal, that lets anyone over the age of 18 invest.
You make a very important point, which is that, and in fact, one of the points that Alex made, and there are 2 things here. Alex, the investor, which is you want lots of other co-investors, but your key point is you'd like a nice slug of that capital stack in every case to make sure you let the community have access to it. It's kind of silly to do a project like this without letting the community have ownership if they want to be part of it, because you're missing
because if there's going to be value at the end, if there's going to be value at the end, why shouldn't they be able to get some of that value? Like, this is a way to start building equity, surely, The Jobs Act actually provides that opportunity. It actually provides that opportunity in those very complicated securities laws. There's a chance here to let everyone in.
I want to introduce you to one other character from this. We have one other little clip. Winston. So now we're moving on to Atlanta. We're meeting Winston, a member of the African American community.
I know, Eve, you're going to have to go fairly soon, I think.
No, it's fine. I'm enjoying it.
Winston.
We've officially entered overtime. It's 5 o'clock here, so it's 8 o'clock there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being with us. Yeah, let's watch Winston and
the man we're about to meet.
Where we go.
Spent an early part of his career on the other side of the law. Now he's a developer. He's been working on these projects, and he also has strong opinions about why kind of for-profit projects that have to produce results may, in cases, be better than what nonprofits do that have less accountability than for-profit.
I agree with him.
Let's meet Winston.
So, community. The necessity for community is in all of our mindsets, our hearts, Whether you're looking at communities in prison, whether you're looking at community sex trafficking community, gang communities, community is everything. There are healthy communities, there are unhealthy communities. And so when you look at an underserved community, it is a unhealthy community. And most of the time, the things that are happening is people are pouring into and supporting unhealthy community. If things look the same way in a community that they did 20 years ago in an underserved community, and you talk about the millions that people have given to churches, the millions that people have given to nonprofits to do this work, but yet 20 years later, it still looks the same and nobody's life has been transformed, that's pimping. Well, it's real simple. CoPlaces and organizations, a lot of them that's doing placemaking, we're doing it, New City, we're for-profits, and they hold us accountable. Nobody gives us without an expectation. No one gives us anything without us being able to really produce the story. So here you come here and we look at where we were a year ago and it's quite different. They invest in the indigenous community that builds and return on investment. That's a very different model than what for-profits or anybody else do. Let me say that again. They come in and invest in indigenous small business population that now gives them a return that they're able to give to their large investors a return. Now, to me, that's the American way. That's the American dream that we've lost focus on. That's when I love that picture when I was looking at it. I was like, man, I got a coffee shop called Rebel's Coffee House. I need to be able to take that back to Atlanta. Because again, it may sound like we are really rebelling against capitalism. We're rebelling against industrialism. But the truth is, capitalism has gone the wrong direction. We haven't gone the wrong direction. We're simply asking capitalism to be at its best and highest performance of capitalism. So it's a win-win for everybody, not a win-lose. And really what we got going on now is, that's what gentrification is. Gentrification is a win-lose. Investor wins and that's what separates and makes people angry, because the investor doesn't have to do that way. And that's what CoPlace and organizations like it has done. You don't have to have that drastic place where the poor people are losing and the wealthy people are the only ones winning. They come in, they create partnerships, they create opportunities. Now when Echo project is being built, and that's what I do, now when Echo's project is being built, there are people that in this 5-year or this 10-year period, unlike this 20 years, when Echo is built now, there are people that have been incubated that now will be able to pay rents. They will be able to go into those spaces at a quicker pace, at a quicker rate, and they're winners as well from the community.
You're on mute. Everybody's on mute.
There we go. Yeah,
I thought we were going to get rid of this whole "you're on mute" thing for 2021. I thought we should just talk.
It's here with us,
and it's going to just be what it is. Somebody will fill it in later with an AI voice, or something. Please fix that in post-production.
Yeah.
So that was Winston, and you said, he was on the other side of the log growing up. He was in a gang. He had other kinds of things going on, and so the point wasn't sort of that. I mean, he's always been a businessman in some ways. The point was that the business is happening, the money's coming in from churches, the money's coming in from things, and there's a lot of money going in, but it's just encouraging the underground because nobody can actually be a participant in the market. Nobody can be a participant in what's happening, it feels like. And I know Jesse, who was in the first clip, was actually from the neighborhood he was walking through, and he had a rough time growing up. And Jesse later, worked with the guy who runs the Ford Foundation now to say, how do we bring foundation money into these things? And it's been a struggle, right? And it's been like he was an investor actually for a number of years with organizations like the Ford Foundation to say nonprofit should and patient capital should put money in too. But this is a tricky thing. It's
one of the optimistic things.
The systemic stuff Eve said. It's you can't fix one thing. It's whack-a-mole if we don't try to.
Right. That's right.
One of the optimistic things about this is, it seems to work in a market-oriented way where you're not appealing to philanthropic capital just to be a philanthropy. You're basically saying, okay, another way to look at it is that they're building a courtyard, right? They're building an outdoor set of businesses and public spaces for a neighborhood. And that project itself, which is going to, either be condoized or have rent, that might have an 8, 9, 10% return. It'll have some return because it's right. Meanwhile, you're creating value in the whole area that lifts it up, that has significant returns. So that should attract a fair amount of capital, and also make a neighborhood that accelerates its coolness. Because instead of long-term blight where you're waiting for something, you activate it, right? Then the next problem is, well, you can't activate it and send the people away. You have to activate it and create ownership, right? So that's the holistic piece.
Yes.
To me, that formula, if you can get that formula right, that's cool, because you're attacking gentrification, you're making it market-oriented, and you're performing. So that's kind of what we were looking into, and just showed you a couple of clips from.
Eve, any last thoughts or comments just from your point of view, like things either that you worry about, you just wake up and worry about, or things that give you hope? And you mentioned that the Black Lives Matter, and also we have a new administration, so we don't have to suddenly watch social.
I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, but it looks to me like there's some positive movement. Or any last thoughts? Because we want to just make sure you get a chance to kind of give us your insight.
I mean, I'm going to say again, I think it all comes down to money. I think there are people who have money and people who don't, and the unhappiness that we're seeing is because there's a huge division between haves and haves not, and this is playing out globally, not just in the United States. But I think we need to really look after that in one way or another. We just need to look after that. I mean, there's many other problems like sufficient housing and etc. We have plenty of problems to deal with. But if you're talking about real estate and turning neighborhoods around, I think we've really reached the point where you can't do that without including the people who live there.
Yeah.
And by including, I mean in a meaningful way. Give them some return, give them a stake in it, give them something, because that's their place,
Yeah.
Mickey, I want to thank you for introducing me and Omid to Eve, because it's clear that the stuff that I've been describing, it's just such a natural to add this investment mechanism so that the community can invest, or even the next community down the pike that wants it to come to town can invest and get curious with the whole thing. It's just a great way to further this mission.
Yeah. I'm so glad you came, Eve.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.
You do have a podcast series, and people can tune on that. And go try it. Be an investor and see what happens.
Oh, yeah, go try it and be an investor, because, there's some pretty small amounts that you can put in and be an investor. And if you have questions, you can always ask us. There's lots of educational information out there. You can ask the developers questions. You can just you don't have to pretend you know what's going on. You can
Eve, how big is your small change team? Because that's a lot to.
We're actually we're a very virtual business, and I actually changed my team right before the pandemic started. It was like very fortuitous. So I have 3 people in house, but I have a bookkeeping team 50 miles away. I have a coding team in New York. I have a social media person in Australia. I have a compliance consultant in Chicago. So we're really it works pretty well. This is a virtual world we're in.
And did you raise, was it like venture money? What kind of money did you have?
No, this is self-funded so far.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes.
Before we go out.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazingly painful.
Yeah, and painful.
Yeah. I worked on a kind of a mechanism last year that was allowing crowdfunding or picking and choosing of opportunity zone projects. So you suddenly had to do with the regulatory stuff and the website.
Yeah.
And the investor. It's a lot of work. So
it's a lot of work, and it's taken a long time. It's a slow
what you
grind.
have to do.
Yeah. But it's very satisfying when I can help a minority developer try to fix something in their neighborhood and and help them raise money legally doing that. It's just fantastic.
Omid, on that front, we have a film festival coming up this weekend on a very related topic.
Yeah, that's right. I'm one of the program producers of the SF Urban Film Fest, and our festival starts this weekend and runs through the following week. Our theme this year is Wisdom Lives in Places, the idea that the people that were on the land that we've taken over and moved on to might know a little bit, and we should check in with them every once in a while. But also, the wisdom of the places we've been and we've lived in is super important. A few of the programs I curated are about, they relate directly to the show. I mean, they relate to Quarantine. It's basically what happened to our food supply chain and restaurants after COVID. Where are we going? How are we going to get people in the restaurant and hospitality industry back up and running? And then another one is streets, shared streets. What do we do with public space? What's happened with public space? How do we reimagine the public realm? All that good stuff. So yeah, if you're interested in stuff like this, most of our programs are free. Pop on over, register, get a link, and I'd love to see the Quarantine audience there this weekend.
All right. Well, thank you, Eve.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
It's
coming.
been a pleasure. Nice to meet you, Peter. Nice to meet
Pleasure
you,
to
Omid.
meet you, and we'll continue this.
Likewise.
Okay.
Well,
so much to do.
Omid, I have an important technical question. When we end the show today, will we hear the music, or will it also be silent?
I think we'll hear the music this time around.
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
I was kind of excited about not hearing it, but that's okay too.
You got to get at least one dose of your Quarantine, your Friday dose, man.
I do need the Friday dose.
Yeah,
It's
we
funny
should
that
actually
it's
do an
polarized.
episode where we play a number of candidate new songs.
Yeah, I think we should try out. It's a new season. It's a new year. We're rebuilding.
Yeah, I think we should enlist the audience and see what they like and get them to vote on stuff. And
Oh, I like it.
yeah.
I was thinking, how when in the middle of your phone you can just say like autocomplete, like when it starts doing it, and you can just do that and it just writes a story for you of what it thinks it should be. I was thinking like we should like say half of a sentence and then just ask the audience what's the next half, and we would just the whole thing would be just crowd curated, maybe word for word.
You're talking about song lyrics, yeah?
Wait, I want to try now. Peter, you got to pay attention to me. Here we go. We're going to create the longest run-on sentence, and the only thing I want you to do is make the person who you're grabbing a hold of the sentence to look really good. So just I'll say the first word, Peter, you say the second, Omid, you the third.
Got it.
Then I'll do the
each person only does one word?
Only one word, and you gotta like assume you're average. Don't try to work too hard, but assume the next person is amazing.
I feel like we should ask our audience to submit some words too.
And of course,
we can pepper in
words.
there.
Yeah, let's watch the comments. But I'm going to start it. Okay, one
amazing
moment
I
beheld
this.
Oh, I tried to think too much. Time.
Which
was
amazing.
And yet
one
light bulb
manifested itself.
Oh, that was 2 words.
In
ephemera.
Deep.
Thoughtful.
Time.
Always.
Seeming.
Infinite.
Quarantine.
A show.
Listen.
It's
Quarantine.
Let's get close, but not so close. Quarantine.
place while